Doctors today know that there's a whole range of things that can cause diseases, such as infections, inflammation, and genetic disorders. But have you ever wondered what the doctors of the past believed were the cause of illnesses? The first thing that comes to mind is probably supernatural explanations, like divine punishment for sins, or astrological phenomena. However, you might be surprised to know that there was a theory employed by physicians of the past to explain the cause of disease, which was incredibly systematic and sophisticated. So sophisticated, in fact, that it was the leading theory of disease for over 2,000 years. It is today known as the theory of Four Humours, or humorism. This video will talk about the development of this theory and how it was eventually superseded. The idea that bodily fluids or humours had a role in human health can be seen as far back to the earliest civilizations of mankind. For example, ancient Indian or Ayurvedic medicine is largely based on the principle of everything being made up of three forces, or doshas. Practitioners in India believed that the blood of a healthy person had a perfect balance of these doshas. Many ancient doctors around the world had their own versions of humorism, with varying opinions about the number of humours that existed, ranging between only 2 humours to up to a dozen. It was the work of the Greek physician Hippocrates in the 5th century BC that first suggests the existence of 4 humours in particular. These 4 humours were blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Some scholars link his proposal to 4 humours to the famous concept of the 4 classical elements, which had recently been conceived by the Greek philosopher Empedocles. These scholars proposed that each humour was thought to contain a certain mixture of air, water, earth, and fire. However, Hippocratic texts make no mention about whether they were inspired by Empedocles or not. Regardless of that, Hippocrates made it quite clear that disease is caused when there is an excess or deficiency in one of those 4 humours. Therefore, to heal a patient, you must aim to add in or remove something from the body to restore its balance. This theory was important as it marks a significant turning point in medicine. Instead of invoking things like demons as being the cause of illness, physicians started to come to a consensus that disease had a physical cause and based the diagnosis and management of patients on what they were observing rather than looking to the heavens. A few hundred years later, the Greek physician Galen built on the work of Hippocrates and made humorism the leading medical framework of the entire Roman Empire. He performed dissections on animals such as pigs and monkeys and was able to extrapolate his findings from these animals and applied them to human physiology. From these dissections, Galen claimed to have gained an understanding on how the 4 humours were formed and how they were distributed all over the body. According to Galen, food and water was digested in the gut to form a substance known as chyle. The chyle then travelled via the portal vein to the liver, where it was digested into blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile in that specific order. The humours were then absorbed into veins and arteries, where they were distributed to all the tissues and organs of the body for their use. Any leftover waste products exited the body via urine, feces, or sweat. Galen claimed that each of the 4 humours had 2 qualities to them, which therefore meant that based on the symptoms that they were presented with, he can diagnose which humour was in excess in a person. For example, if you were feeling cold and wet, then you had an excess of phlegm. The cold and wet feeling was associated with many respiratory conditions, and doctors treated it by giving a patient foods that were hot and dry, such as pepper. Or if you had a fever, you were hot and moist, which meant an excess of blood. Therefore, a doctor would puncture a vein and let blood leak out in a process called bloodletting. Just like those that came before him, Galen stated that the 4 humours were present in perfect balance with each other in a healthy person. But he went further and said that different people naturally have higher levels of specific humours, and that this was responsible for the different personalities or temperaments we see in them. A naturally high level of blood, phlegm, yellow bile, or black bile meant that you were a person who was sanguine, phlegmatic, choleric, or melancholic respectively. Even after the Western Roman Empire fell in the 5th century AD, doctors all over Eurasia continued to base their treatment around the 4 humours. The rise of Islam further strengthened the influence of the theory. Persian and Islamic scholars during the Islamic Golden Age translated several key Greek literary works, including those of Galen. The most influential book of the time was the Canon of Medicine, written by the Persian polymath Avicenna in 1025. In this book, he reaffirmed the importance of the four humours to human health and provided very intricate descriptions of the humours and the temperaments associated with them. The doctors of the Islamic Golden Age made huge advancements in several fields of medicine, including surgery, ophthalmology, and pediatrics. They will in turn go on to inspire many of the doctors of Western Europe during the time of the Renaissance. The way I've described humorism so far makes it appear to be a theory with a solid foundation and a prime example of the passing and expanding of knowledge down many generations. But the people of antiquity still had relatively low life expectancies, high child mortality, and were devastated by numerous epidemics. So you won't be surprised to learn that many doctors had questions about the validity of humorism. The earliest example comes from Al-Razi. He was a Persian scholar who published a work titled Doubts about Galen around the beginning of the 10th century. In this work, Al-Razi challenged the theory of four humours by observing that several treatments recommended by Galen were completely ineffective at healing patients. This included attempting to cure a person who had leprosy using the flesh of a snake. Around 600 years later, the credibility of Galen took a further blow. The Dutch doctor Andreas Vesalius was a pioneer in anatomy and contributed greatly to medical knowledge by performing detailed dissections of humans. This led him to discover that Galen made several errors regarding his views on human anatomy. Among them was the observation that there was an absence of a hole between the two ventricles of the heart, which Galen claimed that he had observed and was necessary for nutrient-filled blood to reach both sides of the body. So perhaps Galen didn't know as much about blood and humours as people previously assumed. Further work and discoveries by other scientists led to things like germ theory completely replacing humorism by the 19th century. But remnants of the theory are still used today by practitioners of ancient Indian and traditional Chinese medicine. Historians of medicine now believe that the only real benefit of bloodletting was the temporary relief of the symptoms caused by high blood pressure. And as any doctor would know, many illnesses that people suffer from are fairly self-limiting, meaning that they'll eventually go away by themselves without any treatment. So what people thought was working in the past was most likely a combination of the immune system and the placebo effect. The only time bloodletting will ever be done by a doctor nowadays is as treatment for something like hemochromatosis, which is a condition where a person has too much iron in the body. But students of modern medicine are constantly reminded of the legacy of the four humours. The four temperaments are still used to this day to describe certain personalities, and the term humoral immunity is now used to describe the part of the immune system that is found in the blood.